Most places don't become dangerous when you arrive. They become dangerous when you stay. Not because something appears, but because nothing tells you to leave. Tonight's stories are about ordinary people who waited, rested, or lingered somewhere just a little too long, and slowly realized the place was still operating for them. The first time it happened, it was at a transit stop that wasn't supposed to be open anymore. Some places don't shut down properly. They just keep running for the people who stay too long. Leo was in his early 30s, between permanent addresses, finishing a short-term contract in upstate New York. On the final Friday in January, a snowstorm killed his plans to drive. He reached the rural transit station just after 7:40, missing the last bus by half an hour. The place was a single long room, empty under fluorescent lights. A sign on the door stated it closed at 8 p.m. He walked to the ticket counter. Behind the glass, a man in a faded uniform was writing in a ledger. Leo knocked lightly. The attendant looked up. His face showed no surprise, only a placid expectancy. "You missed the 7:05, the man said. It wasn't a question. Leo confirmed he had. He asked about taxis, about hotels back in the town he'd just left. The attendant listened, his gaze drifting past Leo to the snow-blurred windows. He shook his head once, a slow, definitive motion. "Nothing's moving now, not in this. You can wait here, it's warm, we don't lock up." The statement was delivered as simple fact. Before Leo could formulate another question, the attendant's eyes returned to his ledger. The conversation clearly ended. The clock ticked to 7:55. The official closing time approached and passed without a sound. The lights did not dim. No shutters were lowered. The attendant remained, a silent silhouette behind the glass, pen moving steadily. Leo took a seat on a bench midway down the room. The vinyl was cold through his jeans. He performed the rituals of stranded travel. He plugged his phone into an outlet, watching the battery icon with disproportionate focus. He opened a novel on his tablet, read the same paragraph 4 times, absorbing none of it. The only sounds were the distant hum of the vending machines, the subaural buzz of the lights, and the muffled howl of the wind. He was acutely aware of his own breathing, the rustle of his coat. This was the boring, inconvenient reality he had expected. It felt real. It felt manageable. At 8:27, the main door opened. A woman entered. She was perhaps in her 50s, wearing a knee-length beige coat that appeared perfectly dry. Not damp, not dusted with melting snow. Dry. She closed the door softly behind her, did not shake off any weather, and did not look around. Her eyes went directly to the bench in the farthest corner, as if she had a reservation. She walked to it, sat, and placed her hands neatly in her lap. She carried no bag, no purse, no shopping. She simply sat, facing forward, her posture relaxed but utterly still. Leo felt a minor social relief, another stranded soul, followed by a pinprick of unease. Her dryness was illogical. He watched her for 5 full minutes. She did not check a phone, sigh, or shift for comfort. She was a statue in a dry coat. Leo's mind offered explanations. She'd been in a car that dropped her off right at the door. She'd waited in a covered area. The explanations felt thin, but they held. This was the first small stone in his shoe, the first detail that required a conscious, slightly forced rationalization. He returned to his book. The words were now just shapes on a screen. His attention was split, one part reading, one part monitoring the still woman in his periphery. The clock's minute hand jumped with an audible click. It was 9 o'clock. The click of the clock seemed to hang in the air. At 9:04, a side door Leo hadn't noticed, painted the same pale green as the wall, opened inward. An older man wearing a flat cap and a brown wool jacket stepped through and closed it behind him without a sound. He moved with a slow, deliberate economy. He did not look at Leo or the woman. His destination was the middle vending machine. He stood before it, not reading the selections, but simply staring through the glass at the coiled racks of chips and candy bars. He stood there for a full 2 minutes, a figure in a still life. Then he raised his hand, placed his palm flat against the glass for a moment and lowered it. He did not insert coins. He did not make a selection. He turned and walked to a bench directly under the wall clock and sat down. Like the woman, he carried nothing. Like the woman, he assumed a posture of infinite patience, his hands resting on his knees. Leo's earlier social relief evaporated. A new, colder understanding took its place. He was not among fellow travelers. They were not stranded. They were in residence. The dryness of the woman's coat, the man's entrance from a service door, their complete lack of luggage or urgency. These were not coincidences. They were data points. His mind, trained for patterns and data migration, began compiling them against his will. He watched the clock. At 9:58, the woman in the beige coat stood up smoothly. She walked to the hallway that led to the restrooms, her footsteps silent on the terrazzo. She was gone for exactly 3 minutes. At 10:01, she returned, resumed her seat, and restored her perfect stillness. Her timing was neither rushed nor leisurely. It was procedural. A heavy quiet settled back over the station, now charged with new meaning. Leo's own body felt clumsy, his breathing too loud. He needed to use the restroom himself. The thought of walking past them, of entering that hallway, felt suddenly like a transgression. He held out until 10:30, the discomfort becoming a sharp, urgent focus. Gritting his teeth against a foolish sense of exposure, he stood and walked to the hallway. As he passed the ticket counter, the attendant's voice, low and clear, stopped him. "It's the door on the left." Leo turned. The attendant was looking at him, his expression neutral. I see it," Leo said. The attendant gave a single, slow nod. "Best to be quick after 11. The night cleaning. They prefer not to be interrupted." He said it like a custodian sharing a helpful tip, but the words landed with the weight of an ordinance. It was the second rule, softly stated. The restroom was stark, clean, and bitterly cold. The fluorescent light buzzed overhead, flickering once in a way that made Leo's reflection in the mirror stutter. When he returned to the main hall, he was hyper-aware of his own movements, feeling like an actor on a stage where everyone else knew the blocking. He resumed his seat. The clock read 10:47. 13 minutes until the next hour. At 10:56, the main door opened again. A younger man entered, his hair damp with melting snow, a small backpack slung over one shoulder. For a fleeting second, Leo felt a surge of normalcy. Here was someone else caught in the storm. The man looked around, met Leo's eyes with a brief, harried glance, and took a seat closer to the entrance, pulling out his phone. His presence was a dissonant chord of real life. But then, at 10:59, he stood, shouldered his bag, and walked back out into the blizzard without a word. He was not part of the pattern. He was an anomaly, and the station had expelled him. The door swung shut, sealing Leo back in with the others. The silent woman and the man under the clock had not reacted to the newcomer's entrance or exit. Midnight passed. The storm outside began to quiet, but a deeper silence thickened inside. The lighting seemed to change, not in brightness but in quality, becoming a flat, sterile glow that erased shadows. The hum of the vending machine stopped abruptly, leaving a vacuum filled only by the relentless click of the advancing minute hand. The cold, held at bay by the heating system, began to seep in differently. not as a drop in temperature, but as a pervasive directional chill that seemed to emanate from the walls themselves, focusing on the space between Leo's shoulder blades. He watched the man in the flat cap. At 12:58, the man stood and performed the same silent pilgrimage to the restrooms, returning at 1:01. The predictability was now a prison sentence. Leo's mind, exhausted, began to abandon logic. It started proposing surreal, terrifying theorems. If A, the dry woman, and B, the cap man, perform action, Y, the hourly ritual, under condition Z, the open station, then C, Leo must also perform Y to maintain the set. Survival was no longer about waiting for a bus. It was about maintaining the equilibrium of this place. At 2:58, a profound fatigue washed over him, a heaviness that felt chemical. His eyes were fixed on the second hand of the wall clock, sweeping toward the top of the hour. His muscles tensed. A quiet, screaming voice in his head told him to stay seated, to break the pattern, to prove he was different. The second hand clicked onto the 12. His body stood up. It was not a decision. It was an autonomic response, a reflex trained by 5 hours of silent observation. The terror he felt was perfectly still. He walked to the restroom, his legs moving with a foreign efficiency. He did not need to go. He stood in the cold, buzzing room for 3 minutes, staring at the drain in the sink. When he returned to his bench at 3:01, he did not look at the other passengers. He simply sat, his hands placed on his knees in unconscious mimicry. The resistance was gone. He had been integrated. An hour later, near 4 a.m., the attendant finally left his post. He walked not to the door, but to stand before Leo's bench. He looked down at Leo, his face still placid, but his eyes held a glint of something like completion. "The 7:05 will be on time," he said softly. "You'll want to be ready to board. Tickets are checked at the platform door." He paused, then added, "It's important to have your ticket ready." "I don't have a ticket," Leo heard himself say, his voice a dry rustle. "I missed the bus." The attendant's lips moved in something that was not a smile. "You have a ticket." He turned and walked back to his counter. Leo, his heart a cold stone, slowly unzipped the front pocket of his duffel bag. Inside, among pens and old receipts, his fingers found a small, stiff rectangle of cardstock. He pulled it out. It was a bus ticket, crisp and new. It was printed with the station's name, a date for today, and a departure time, 7:05 a.m. He had never purchased it. The final hours were the longest. Leo held the ticket, the physical proof of the station's claim on him. He did not move from the bench. He did not sleep. He watched the dark windows lighten from black to charcoal gray. The storm had passed, leaving a pre-dawn stillness that felt more alien than the night's howling wind. At 6:30, the overhead lights brightened by a single imperceptible degree. The man in the flat cap and the woman in the beige coat stood in unison. They did not stretch. They did not speak to each other. They walked side by side to the unmarked green side door. The man opened it. A short corridor lit by a single bare bulb was visible for a second. They stepped through and the door swung shut behind them, clicking with finality. They were gone. Leo was alone with the attendant. At 6:55, the attendant emerged from behind the counter holding a small brass-handled key. He walked to the main double doors, unlocked them, and pushed one open. Bitter, clean morning air flooded in, shocking Leo's senses. "Platform is open," the attendant said, not looking back. Leo stood, his joints stiff, his duffel bag in hand. He walked toward the open door, the ticket clenched in his other fist. He expected to see a bus, its engine idling. Outside, under a pearlescent gray sky, was only the empty, snow-blanketed parking lot. His rental car was a white mound. A cleared pathway led from the door to the edge of the asphalt, where a yellow line was painted on the ground. a theoretical platform. No bus, no vehicle of any kind. Boarding for the 7:05, the attendant's voice came from behind him, calm and clear. Leo stood on the yellow line, the freezing air biting his face. He understood. This was the ritual's final step, a choice presented as a non-choice. He looked at the empty lot, the silent pines in the distance, the utterly normal cold morning. He took one step forward off the yellow line onto the untrodden snow of the parking lot. "Very well," the attendant said softly. Leo did not look back. He walked to his car, scraped the windows with numb hands, and spent 40 minutes rocking the vehicle until it broke free of its snowy berth. As he pulled onto the deserted access road, he glanced in the rearview mirror. The station door was closed. The building sat silent, a concrete block under the gray sky, showing no sign of life or that any had ever been there. 2 weeks later, in the warmth of a new apartment in a different city, Leo found the ticket in the pocket of his winter coat. It was still crisp. The printed date and time, 7:05 a.m., were clear. He held it under a lamp, examining it. It looked real. It felt real. He found the website for the County Transit Authority. He navigated to a contact form, his fingers hovering over the keys. He typed a simple, precise question. "Could you confirm the operating status and schedule of the regional transit station as of last January?" The reply came 3 days later. It was polite, automated, and unequivocal. "Thank you for your inquiry. The station in question was decommissioned as a live transit stop in the autumn of 2020. The building is maintained in a weather-locked state and is not open to the public. No official bus services have been scheduled to or from that location since that time." Leo read the email twice. Then he looked at the ticket stub on his desk. He picked it up. He held it beside his computer screen, comparing the official digital certainty of the message with the physical inked fact in his hand. Both were true. That was the only thing he knew for certain. The warmth was perfect. The price was right. And according to the motel's records, Arthur never actually checked out. Arthur was in his late 50s, a regional inventory auditor whose territory had just been expanded to include the great empty stretches between Nebraska and Utah. His life had settled into the quiet rhythm of mileage reports, laminated motel keys, and dinners that came in baskets. He was on the road not to escape, but because it was now the fixed track of his career. In February, this meant driving into the teeth of the plains winter. When a wind shear warning flashed on his dashboard somewhere in the vast dark of Wyoming off I-80, he took the next exit. It promised fuel, food, and lodging. The Crossroads Inn was a single-story L shape of faded blue doors under a flickering vacancy sign. The lobby was a blast of dry, overheated air that smelled of industrial carpet cleaner and fried food from a nearby vent. A young man at the counter scrolled on his phone, glanced up as the door chimed, and offered a practiced, empty smile. "Just a room for the night," Arthur said, his voice steady from a lifetime of similar requests. "Something quiet and warm. My sedan's heater is more of a suggestion." The clerk, his name tag read Dylan, nodded. His fingers danced across the keyboard. A frown flickered. He scrolled, clicked, then scrolled again with a deliberate slowness. "We're pretty full up with the weather," he said, not looking up. Arthur felt the familiar pinch of travel inconvenience. The next exit was 30 miles. "Huh," Dylan muttered. His eyes darted to a yellowed sticky note stuck to the side of his monitor, then back to the screen. He performed one final slow click. "Actually, there's 417. I'll take it. It's a bit different," Dylan said, the scripted hospitality faltering for a second. He met Arthur's eyes. "The heater in that one works really well, like always. Some folks find it oppressive. He said it like he was admitting a minor mechanical flaw, a dripping faucet. Oppressive is what I need, Arthur said, pushing his company card across the counter. The transaction processed. Instead of a key card, Dylan bent down and rummaged in a drawer with a sound of clattering metal. He placed an old-fashioned brass key attached to a heavy red plastic fob numbered 417 on the counter. It looked worn, the edges of the fob smooth and shiny from handling. "End of the row, around the corner. You'll feel it," Dylan said, his gaze already drifting back to his phone. The key turned with a solid, satisfying clunk. As Arthur pushed the door to room 417 open, a wall of air met him. It wasn't the dry, blasting heat of the lobby. This was different. It was a deep, pervasive, and perfectly humidless warmth that wrapped around him like a breath held too long. It didn't greet him. It enveloped him. He stepped inside, letting the door swing shut, sealing him in a profound, insulated quiet. The howl of the wind vanished. He stood there for a full minute, briefcase in hand, simply experiencing it. The deep, bone-level chill from the long drive began to loosen its grip. It felt less like a motel room and more like a biological state. The room was standard for its tier. 2 double beds with burnt orange spreads, a dark wood laminate dresser chipped at the corners, a flat panel television on a stand bolted to the wall. It was clean, but not aggressively so. There was a lived-in patina. The beige carpet was flattened in a definitive traffic pattern from the door to the beds to the bathroom. The air carried a scent, faint, barely there, not floral, not clean. It was the smell of breath on a pillowcase, of skin on starched cotton. It was the smell of a person, absent. Arthur placed his briefcase on the luggage stand. He looked for a thermostat. The wall near the entrance was blank save for a small, empty screw hole where one should have been. He tried the window, his fingers finding the latch. It turned, but the window didn't budge. He peered at the seam. It wasn't locked. It was painted shut, multiple thick, glossy coats sealing it to the frame. A deliberate, final act. Efficiency, he thought, his auditor's mind filing it. Sealed for climate control, reduces costs. The rationalization was easy, buoyed by the sheer physical relief. He hung his suit bag in the closet. One of the 6 wire hangers was bent in a specific zigzag shape, as if forced to hold a heavy coat for a very long time. He slept deeply, dreamlessly, submerged in the constant, perfect warmth. He woke to the same temperature. The room was dark, the digital clock on the nightstand blinking 12 o'clock. His watch showed 6:47 a.m. The power must have flickered in the night. The silence was absolute. No hum of a furnace kicking on, no rattle of pipes. The warmth was simply a state of being, like gravity. He showered in hot water that felt no different from the air. He dressed. As he went to put his toiletry kit away, he opened the top drawer of the dresser out of idle habit. It was empty, but it stuck halfway, requiring a specific jiggle to the left to close. A familiar stubborn catch in the wooden runner. He did it without thinking, a muscle memory for a drawer he'd never used. The action stopped him cold. He opened and closed it again. The same catch in the same spot. A piece of furniture wearing a groove of specific, repeated habit. A new, more pointed unease began to prickle. It wasn't about the room being odd. It was about the room being familiar. He did a slow circuit, his auditor's eye now fully engaged, seeking discrepancies. He noticed the bathroom tile directly in front of the sink was slightly more worn. Its pattern faded, as if someone had stood there for a decade of mornings. The television's remote, sealed in a plastic case, had a worn spot on the volume up button. He needed coffee, air, the spreadsheet waiting in his briefcase. The moment he opened the door to leave, the cold Wyoming morning slapped him in the face, a shocking violence after the room's embrace. He hurried to the lobby. The same clerk, Dylan, was there, talking in low tones to an older woman in a housekeeping uniform. Dylan casually saying, "That one handles itself." They fell silent as Arthur entered. Dylan offered the same hollow smile. "Everything okay in 417? Dylan asked. It was too quick before Arthur could even speak. "It's consistently warm," Arthur said, watching the clerk's face. "The windows sealed shut." Dylan's smile didn't change. "Climate control policy, for guest comfort and energy efficiency." The answer was ready, rehearsed. The housekeeper looked at the floor, rearranging her cart of linens. "There's no thermostat." "Central system," Dylan said, turning to the computer screen. "Can't adjust it per room. More coffees brewing in the dining nook." The dismissal was professional and complete. The dining nook was 2 small tables. The coffee was bitter and weak. Arthur sat where he could see the front desk. Over the next 20 minutes, he watched 3 other guests approach. Each time, Dylan performed the same routine: a check of the screen, a glance at the sticky note, a pause, then an allocation. None were sent to the 400 wing. A man in a trucker's cap complained his room was freezing. Dylan apologized, said maintenance was aware, and offered extra blankets. Arthur's room wasn't part of the normal inventory. It was a separate category, a line item with its own rules. He returned to 417. The warmth welcomed him back, a feeling now uncomfortably close to recognition. He had to audit the asset. He started a methodical, non-invasive but thorough search. He pulled the beds from the wall. Behind the headboard of the bed he'd slept in, tucked against the baseboard, he found a single bent paperclip. Under the dresser, a rectangle of carpet less faded, as if shielded for years by a piece of luggage sitting in the exact same spot. In the nightstand drawer, below the phone book and a local takeout menu, he found the ledger. It was a Gideon's Bible. He went to put it back when its weight felt wrong. He opened the front cover. The standard presentation page was there, but on the blank flyleaf opposite, someone had drawn neat, ruled columns in pencil. At the top was scribbled 417. The columns were headed date in and date out. The list began over 7 years ago. J. Miller, November 14th, November 15th. T. Reed, November 17th, November 18th. L. Chen, November 20th, November 21st. It went on, line after line, in different inks and handwritings, sometimes with a gap of a day, sometimes of only hours. The entries continued season after season through the present year. The most recent entry was 3 days ago. The one before that, 2 days before that. The room had been in constant rotating use for years. There was no record of cleaning, maintenance, or vacancy. It was a log of perpetual occupancy. His own name was not yet there. He was living in the gap between the last entry and the next, a temporary entry in a permanent ledger. The realization was not a shock, but a cold, professional settling. The warmth wasn't a feature. It was a condition of preservation, a holding pattern. The room maintained itself for the next occupant, and the next, in one unbroken line. The painted window, the missing thermostat, the clerk's script. They weren't flaws. They were the control system. The room was always available because it was never not occupied. It simply transferred its claim. Arthur packed his bag with slow, deliberate movements. He did not shower. He did not use the towel. He wanted to leave no trace, to be a ghost entry. At 9:30 p.m., he placed the brass key on the dresser, took one last look at the perfectly anonymous, perfectly warm room, and walked out. The cold was a brutal, clarifying shock. He drove through the night, the car heater roaring at maximum, his skin craving a chill it could no longer seem to absorb. A week later, settled into a temporary corporate apartment in Salt Lake City. A paper envelope arrived amidst the junk mail. It was from the Crossroads Inn. Inside was not a bill, but a single, crisp, platinum guest loyalty card, his name printed incorrectly as a guest. The letter on cheap stock welcomed him to the program and noted his recent extended stay in room 417 had qualified him for lifetime status. There was no points balance, no benefits listed. Just the card and a line thanking him for his continued occupancy. He threw it in the trash. 3 months later, applying for a new line of credit to consolidate some debts, the banker, a polite man in a too-stiff suit, frowned at his screen. His fingers tapped a quiet staccato. "I'm seeing a small recurring monthly charge from a lodging provider in Wyoming," he said, his tone tactful, professional. $1 even. It's minor, but with your other debt, it's impacting your debt-to-income ratio just enough to be a hurdle. Do you want me to help you dispute it? Arthur's blood seemed to slow in his veins. The perfect warmth of the room ghosted over his skin. Recurring? The banker scrolled, nodding. Posted on the 1st of every month, started in February. He turned the screen. Arthur leaned forward. There, in the clean, merciless columns of the banking software, was the line. CRSRDSINN OCCUPANCYFEE RM 417. The room wasn't charging him for a past stay. It was billing him systematically for a current one. He stared at the line item, a perfect digital record of an impossibility. The banker waited for an answer, his pen poised. Arthur said nothing. There was nothing to dispute. The fee was for services rendered. The occupancy was ongoing. Some silences are passive, others are operational. Maya, whose job was to listen for a living, learned that the ferry terminal, after the last announced crossing, held the second kind. Maya was in her late 20s, a sound engineer who had just spent the last brutal 3 weeks on a shoestring indie film shoot in a rain-soaked coastal town in Washington state. Her world had been a chaos of boom mics, overlapping dialogue, and the director's endless requests for more emptiness in the background tone. The shoot wrapped a day early. While the rest of the crew packed gear into vans for the long drive south, Maya's cheap flight from the nearest city was canceled. My rental car was already back on the mainland, and the only motel I could afford was across the water. The ferry was her last miserable option back to something resembling her life. She arrived at the terminal with time to spare for the 6 p.m. crossing. The sky was a damp, textured gray, perfect for their film, oppressive for escape. By 5:45, a thick, swallowing fog had erased the water, and a flat, digitized announcement crackled through the steel-beamed hall. All crossings were canceled until further notice due to zero visibility. The terminal emptied quickly, the relieved sigh of a crowd, the shuffle of boots, the rolling suitcases. Soon it was just Maya, the reverb of her own footsteps, and a single security guard in a distant glass booth. She watched him through the rain-beaded window as he shut down his computer, pulled on a coat, and left without a backward glance. A single bank of overhead fluorescents stayed on, casting a sterile, shadowless light over the polished concrete and the endless rows of blue, bolted benches. The silence that descended was profound, but it was a technical silence. The absence of noise. To her trained ear, it was full of texture. The subaural hum of the lights, the distant resonant bass of the foghorn marking time every 90 seconds. It was a silence she could work with. It was real. She found a bench. She put in her earbuds not to play music, but to listen to the raw field recordings from the shoot, cleaning up audio on her laptop. The work absorbed her. The time passed in a blur of spectral frequency graphs and noise gates. At 9:30 p.m., her back stiff, she stood to walk. It was then she noticed the first anomaly, not through sound, but through its failure. The bank of 4 main entrance doors, which had been securely closed, now stood propped open. Each was held ajar by an identical wooden wedge. A cool, damp draft flowed in, but it made no sound, no whistle, no rattle. The security booth was dark and empty. This was a broken protocol. Doors should be locked. A guard should be present. A sound should be associated with the change. There was none. She walked to the doors. The world outside was a void of white. She removed the wedge from one door, let it swing shut. It closed with a deep, weighted thump that seemed to travel the length of the empty hall and return, unanswered. She replaced the wedge. The action felt pointless. The silence accepted it and remained unchanged. She returned to her bench. The texture of the quiet had altered. It was no longer neutral. It was waiting. At 10:55 p.m. it happened. A new impossible silence manifested. A vast, dark shape, longer than 2 semi-trucks, solidified from the fog in the nearest slip. It was the passenger ferry, but it was dark and utterly silent. No engine groan, no water churn, no crew shouts. It was a slab of pure shadow gliding forward, kissing the buffers with a faint, almost inaudible sigh of compressed rubber. A lone silhouette stood on the bridge. At the same instant, the large destination board above the gates, static for hours, erupted in a series of loud, mechanical clack-clack-clacks, its split flap display updated. 11 p.m. crossing. Boarding. The calm, automated female voice filled the hall. Now boarding. The 11 p.m. crossing. All passengers proceed to Gate 3. Maya's breath caught. A rescheduled crossing. She packed her gear in a rush, the zipper of her bag loud and garish. She hurried toward Gate 3, and then she saw the people. They did not come from the doors. They appeared from the negative spaces, from the shadow behind a pillar, from the mouth of the darkened restroom hallway. There were perhaps 7 or 8. They moved with a direct, fluid economy toward the ramp extended from the silent ferry. None carried bags. Their footsteps, even on the hard floor, registered in her mind as a visual fact, not an auditory one. They made no sound. A crewman in a dark jacket stood at the ramp head. He did not check tickets. He did not speak. His eyes were fixed on a point in the empty center of the hall. Maya, her sound bag over her shoulder, joined the back of the silent line. When she reached the crewman, she stopped. "Hey," she said, the word sharp, a needle in the padded quiet. "Is this the ferry to Anacortes?" The crewman's eyes did not move toward her. His head turned just a fraction, a slow, horizontal slide. It wasn't a no. It was a dismissal of the sound of her voice, of the question as a concept. Behind her, the soundless passengers waited, not impatiently. They simply existed in the queue. "Final call for the 11 p.m. crossing," the voice announced, its cadence unchanged. Maya, the sound engineer, looked at the silent ferry, then at the crewman's averted face. The horror clicked into place with professional clarity. This was not a transportation event. It was a recording on a loop, and she was live noise threatening the fidelity of the track. She was not being stopped. She was being filtered out. She took a deliberate step back, off the ramp. The crewman's gaze did not flicker. The line of silent passengers flowed past her and into the dark hull. None looked at her. In moments, they were gone. The ramp retracted with a soft hydraulic sigh. The dark ferry slid back into the fog without a single audible cue, leaving the water perfectly undisturbed. The board clacked back to canceled. Maya was alone. But the silence now had a different quality. It was curated. It had removed the extraneous audio, the ferry's engine, the passenger's steps, her own voice, and left behind a perfect, horrifying mix. She felt a new, personal void, the absence of her own signal in the world. The terminal settled back into its curated silence. The foghorn bleated its regular lonely note. Maya stood frozen at the empty gate. her sound bag heavy on her shoulder. The professional part of her brain, the part that categorized and logged, was screaming. Diegetic sound, absent. Foley's for movement, absent. Room tone, artificially preserved. This wasn't just strange, it was a violation of physics, of the rules of a recorded space. She had to document it. She retreated to her bench, her heart thumping a frantic rhythm in her ears, the only loud sound left. She opened her laptop and connected her portable field recorder, a high-sensitivity device capable of capturing a whisper across a room. She placed it on the bench beside her, its red record light a single accusing eye in the gloom. She opened her editing software, watching the live waveform display. It showed a flat, near-zero line punctuated only by the distant, predictable spike of the foghorn every 90 seconds. She set a timer. The next crossing was listed for 2 a.m. The wait was an exercise in auditory hallucination. Her mind, desperate for input, began to manufacture sounds, the scuff of a shoe, the rustle of a coat, from the endless null of the waveform. She checked the recorder again and again. Its meters were dead. At 1:50 a.m., she pointed it directly at the slip and turned the gain to its maximum setting, a level that would normally capture the hum of electricity in the walls. At 1:55, the dark ferry materialized again, a shadow bleeding out of a shadow, no engine hum, no water displacement. It was as if the fog itself congealed into the shape of a ship. Clack, 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 the board updated. 2 a.m. crossing, boarding. The calm voice announced boarding. Maya watched the waveform on her screen. As the silent passengers emerged and walked toward the ramp, the display remained a flat, unwavering line. No peaks, no troughs. It was capturing absolute silence during an event that should have been rich with layered sound. It was impossible. A fault in the machine or a fault in reality. This time, she did not join the queue. She stood to the side, her recorder held out like a talisman. As the last soundless passenger boarded, she did something reckless. She spoke directly into her recorder, her voice a raw, live wire in the dead air. Test. This is Maya. I am at the Anacortes terminal. The ferry is here. People are boarding. I can see them, but I can't hear anything. On her laptop screen, her voice registered as a jagged, beautiful peak in the flat line. Proof she was still there. The crewman at the ramp finally moved. His head turned, not toward her, but toward the small, glowing red light of her recorder. His expression didn't change, but the dismissal in his earlier look was gone, replaced by something worse. Recognition of a contaminant. He took one step in her direction. A cold, final understanding clicked into place. She wasn't just being filtered out, she was live audio feedback. And the system was about to mute her. She didn't think. She ran, not toward the exit, but away from the gate, deeper into the terminal, around a corner into a service corridor marked Staff Only. She heard no footsteps behind her. The only sound was her own panicked breath and the pounding of her blood. She found a dead-end alcove with a fire extinguisher and crouched, cradling the recorder, its red light still burning. Minutes passed. The silence returned deeper than before. The curated operational silence had reasserted itself. She had been deleted from the mix. When she finally dared to peek out, the ferry was gone. The board read, "Cancelled." The terminal was empty. The wedges were still in the doors. She moved on pure instinct. She did not wait for a morning that might not come for someone like her. She shouldered her bags, walked out through the propped open doors, and fled into the fog. She walked for what felt like hours along the coastal road, guided by the dim glow of her phone, until the lights of an all-night gas station and diner emerged from the gray like a mirage. The clatter of dishes, the rumble of a truck engine, the buzz of neon. It was a cacophonous, beautiful symphony. She was shaking. The next morning, on a crowded bus heading south, she put in her earbuds. She had to know. She navigated to the recording from the 2 a.m. crossing. She pressed play. There was her voice, clear and terrified. "Test. This is Maya. I can't hear anything." Then, nothing. Not silence. Null. Digital null. A complete zero-amplitude void that stretched for the duration of the file. Her professional software couldn't analyze it. There was nothing to analyze. It wasn't quiet. It was the sound of a hole in the world. She had captured an event that refused to be recorded. Weeks later, back in her apartment, she emailed the ferry company's customer service. A simple, professional query. "Can you provide the operational log for the Anacortes terminal for that night, specifically regarding any unscheduled crossings or security protocols?" Customer service replied 2 days later. The message was polite and brief. The 11 p.m. and 2 a.m. sailings had departed and returned without incident. No passengers were recorded silent. She closed the email. On her desk, the waveform of the null recording was still open on her screen, a flat, endless line. She never used that particular field recorder again. Sometimes, in the deep quiet of her studio, she would hear the faint, ghostly echo of the foghorn, perfectly timed, even though she now lived hundreds of miles from any coast. It was just her memory, of course, a sound stuck on a loop. But in her profession, you learned that the clearest signal was often the one you couldn't actually hear. Months later, the recorder still behaved strangely. Sometimes, when it's sitting idle on my desk, batteries removed, power switch off, the red recording light flickers once. Just long enough to remind me that silence, when it's recorded properly, doesn't mean nothing was there. These weren't haunted places. They didn't need to be. They were just places that kept running for the people who never left.